threw her into the grave where they laid the old man. Oluoma watched in anger as the people began to pour sand into the grave, closing it up. She watched as the lady inside the grave began to plead with them not to bury her alive. But when it looked like they wouldn't listen, she asked them,
"Please feed me first. I have not eaten since morning."
But the people did not seem to care. Oluoma watched in agony as the lady laid a curse on them with her last breath. She said,
"As you all have buried me with hunger, so shall all the..."
Once upon a time, in a village called Ugozi, where people lived in peace and harmony, there lived a woman named Oluoma. Oluoma was pregnant, but she was very unhappy. She sat under a tree close to her hut, lost in thoughts. Oluoma was married to Okonkwo, who is a farmer. Okonkwo had been a good and supportive husband to Oluoma, so he was worried when he saw her sitting alone and lost in thoughts. He walked up to her and sat beside her, but he did not say anything. He just held her. Oluoma was consumed by emotions and she burst into tears. Okonkwo did not stop her from crying. He just held her and assured her that he would always be there for her. Okonkwo understood the reason for her tears and kept consoling her. In Oluoma's family, there was a deadly generational curse that ran in their lineage. For generations, every female in Oluoma's household dies of stomach pain after they stop breastfeeding their child. When Okonkwo was to marry Oluoma, a lot of people advised him not to marry her, but he was already deeply in love with her, which made him not to listen to anyone. So he went ahead and married her. Oluoma, who is now pregnant and almost due, was sad, worried and scared. She kept crying because she was scared of losing her life. They have tried all they could to find out the cause and the solution, but nothing seemed to be working. Okonkwo made up his mind to not stop trying until he found a solution to the wife's problem. One early morning, Okonkwo decided to embark on a journey to a distant village called Idemba. After saying goodbye to his wife, he set out on his journey to Idemba. Traveling a very long distance, going from village to village and looking for any strong native doctor who could help him with his problem. There were times he wanted to give up, but each time he remembered losing his loving wife, he got motivated and continued trying. He kept walking for many days, and he began to get fed up. But when it looked like all hopes were lost, a miracle happened. Okonkwo, who had been walking for a very long time, saw a tree by the side of the road and decided to sit there and rest for a while. As he sat there enjoying some fresh air and cool warmth of the tree, he slept off and he had a dream. In his dream, he saw an old man standing in front of him.
"My son, I see your effort to help your wife out of her course. I see that you are eager to help your wife. I will help you. Keep walking left and you will get the answers you need."
The old man pointed in a direction and kept saying,
"Go, go, go."
Okonkwo jumped up from his sleep and looked around, but he couldn't find anybody. He turned again and saw the direction the old man pointed to, asking him to go in his dream. After much contemplation, he decided to give it a try. So he followed the direction and came out into a very strange-looking village, where the people of the village were dwarfs. He was surprised and shocked. He didn't know that somewhere like that existed. He was marveled at the small building structures and how the people moved around him like they didn't notice him. He bent down and stopped one of them. He asked for the direction to the village chief priest, and the person just pointed at a direction and continued walking without saying anything. Okonkwo found that strange, but he continued on his way. Locating the shrine was a bit difficult, but after searching for long, he finally found it. He stepped into the shrine and he saw the priest sitting and reciting some incantations. So he waited for him to finish.
Abani kokolo enyana. Kambele ichaka. Abarandi anaka. Ikunki kama.
After a while, the chief priest stopped the incantation and turned to Okonkwo.
Young man, I know why you are here, but you have to go and come back with your pregnant wife.
The chief priest said this and turned to his shrine to continue his incantation. Okonkwo stood for a while, looking so lost and confused. He had so many questions in his mind to ask, but he just could not. So he decided to do just as the priest instructed. He left and began to journey back to his village. He traveled for several days before he got back home. His wife welcomed him and he narrated everything that happened to him, how much he suffered and the things he went through on his journey. Oluoma was scared about going with her husband to the land of the dwarf, but the fear of death motivated her, and in 2 days' time, they were on their way to the land of the dwarfs. It wasn't an easy journey for Oluoma due to her pregnancy. She had to stop at intervals to eat, rest, and drink water before they continued. It wasn't long before they ran out of food and water due to how Oluoma consumed the food. After a long journey, longer than when Okonkwo came, they finally got to the village. And just like Okonkwo, Oluoma was also surprised and shocked at the building structure and the people in the village. Oluoma followed Okonkwo closely as he led her to the shrine. On getting to the shrine, the chief priest stood watching them enter into his shrine. He offered them chairs and asked them to rest and recover the strength which they have wasted, and that they would resume at night. When it began to get darker, and as night drew near, the chief priest and Oluoma stood under the big full moon, and the chief priest started chanting some powerful chants.
Ikilimanda, 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 Ikilimanda.
The chanting was a spiritual language to make Oluoma fall asleep. The magical chant began to hold, and Oluoma slumped and fell into a very deep sleep. The chief priest blew a white substance on her face, covering her body with some big leaves. The chief priest and Okonkwo watched Oluoma sleep, waiting and anticipating her to wake up. While the chief priest and Okonkwo watched Oluoma sleep, Oluoma had traveled back in time of her ancestors, which seemed to her like she was dreaming. In her dream, she saw a village and people moving around. She knew immediately that these were people of old. Nobody seemed to notice or see her. She tried shouting, but nobody turned to her. She thought she was dead and was scared. But as she watched everyone go about their business, all of a sudden she heard a shout of pain and people gathered around the hut where the shout came from. She walked into the hut to see that the family had lost their grandfather, who happened to be the oldest man in the village. She watched as they prepared him for burial, and some of the youth started digging a grave beside the hut. She felt bad for the family, but continued watching things as they unfolded. After digging the grave to bury the old man, an argument arose amongst the men. Oluoma walked close to hear the reason for their argument, and it turned out that they are to bury the old man with another living human being. Oluoma was shocked at the discovery and was angry that they could even think of such. She watched as the people decided on who they would bury the old man with. Tears ran down her eyes as she watched them. When the old man was laid to the ground, 3 young ladies walked into the compound carrying farm produce. It happened that they had been in the farm all day and didn't get the news of the old man's death. They looked confused when they saw a lot of people in the compound, and when they found out about the old man's death, they all burst into tears. Oluoma watched as they cried. She felt their pain too, because she knew what it felt like when she lost her father. But the next thing that happened shocked her. The people who were arguing on whom to use earlier grabbed one of the girls and tied her up. They threw her into the grave where they laid the old man. Oluoma watched in anger as the people began to pour sand into the grave, closing it up. She watched as the lady inside the grave began to plead with them not to bury her alive. But when it looked like they wouldn't listen, she asked them,
Please feed me first. I have not eaten since morning.
But the people did not seem to care. Oluoma watched in agony as the lady laid a curse on them with her last breath. She said,
As you all have buried me with hunger, so shall all the female in this lineage die of stomach pain after breastfeeding forever.
Oluoma couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She let it fall and immediately she woke up still crying. Okonkwo held his wife, comforting her. The chief priest stood watching them. When Oluoma was calm and better, she narrated her dream to her husband and the chief priest, who listened attentively. Okonkwo couldn't help it but also cry with his wife. After a while, Okonkwo turned to the chief priest and asked him of the way forward and the solution to the problem.
You need to locate the grave where the lady was buried with the old man and appease her. Only she can break the curse.
The chief priest said to them before leaving them to spend the night in the shrine, since it was late to go back. By early dawn the next morning, Okonkwo and Oluoma thanked the chief priest and embarked on their journey back home. After several days, they got back home. The next day, Okonkwo and Oluoma journeyed to Oluoma's family house to look around for the grave, but they couldn't find it. After searching the whole compound over and over again, they left. They couldn't find anything or even a clue. Oluoma suggested they find out about her family from the oldest man in the village, so they went to his house. After telling him everything about their travels, their discoveries, the old man he got up and asked them to follow him, which they did. He walked for a long time and stopped in front of the forest. He turned to them and said,
This is where your ancestors stayed, but they had to leave when the girl's ghost couldn't let them have peace.
The old man said and left them there, going back to his house. Okonkwo and Oluoma went into the forest, and from the dream, Oluoma had she could remember where the lady was buried, and they quickly located it. Oluoma knelt down before the grave while Okonkwo stood back watching around. She cried in a loud voice, begging and pleading for forgiveness with tears running down her eyes. After a long time of crying and pleading, a strong wind blew around the forest, shaking the trees. Okonkwo had to hold his wife. The wind came directly to the grave, and out of it appeared the lady Oluoma saw in her dream. She stood with tears in her eyes. When Oluoma saw her, she increased her pleading and begging and asking for forgiveness. Immediately the wind stopped and everything began to calm down.
The sins of your ancestors are forgiven. You are free. Go in peace,
the lady said while smiling with tears still running down her eyes, and she disappeared. Okonkwo picked his wife, and while Oluoma was trying to get up, her water broke and she screamed in pain. She went into labor. Okonkwo tried to help her move, but she couldn't. So he had to quickly run around, got some leaves and laid them on the floor and made Oluoma lie on it. There and then, he helped her deliver, and when the baby came out, it was a girl, and she was a carbon copy of the lady that was buried with the old man. Okonkwo looked at the child, shook his head, and said to the child,
"This time around, nobody will kill you. He will live till a good old age."
Okonkwo took his wife and baby home. Oluoma had more children and grew old with them.